Well, today's the day. We just got everything back from the sandblaster. It's going to be a long day. I have 8 panels to prime up today. So it looks like I have the tailgate, the 2 doors, the hood, the bumper, the core support, and the 2 fenders. So I've got 2 different types of primer that I bought. Now I bought some white primer, and I also bought some toner, some tint, to kind of give us a yellow effect. So let me take you over and show you what I actually got. Got one from Eastwood, and then I got some 5-star stuff from our local supplier. So let me go ahead and open up the boxes and show you what we got. So I'm going to walk you guys through a couple of things I bought. Now from Eastwood, I got an epoxy primer. Now this is a white primer, and this right here is the reducer. Okay, it's a 2-part epoxy, and this here is the primer. Now it's a white base. All we have to do with this one is mix it 50-50. So whatever you got for here, you've got a quart here and a quart here. This is a 50-50. What we paid for that through Eastwood, with shipping, the total was $46.94. Now this will give us 2 cups, probably 4 full cups of spraying power. And that's what I bought from them. Now this here is the toner that we purchased. This is an actual tint that we are going to use to get this kind of a color. We're trying to get kind of a creamish, yellowish color. And this is a tintable primer. This here, we don't know if it's tintable, so we're going to experiment a little bit on the 5-star stuff. And so on this primer, it's basically a 1-to-1 mixing ratio. So 1 part epoxy, 1 part of the primer reducer. And all you have to do is get a mixing cup that has that on here. So if you can see there, it just says 1-to-1. That's what we're going to do, 1 part of primer and 1 part of reducer. And it's kind of like a thinner, but it's basically a urethane based epoxy. This is what you want to put right after you seal your stuff that's been blasted. Now we'll sand this down just a little bit to get a nice even coat before we apply this. So that is what we got from Eastwood. Now these are both experimental. Now let me take you over and show you the 5-star stuff. Alright, now I'm going to show you the 5-star stuff. Now this is what I got from my local paint supplier. This is a 5-star extreme urethane reducer. Now this is a 3-part epoxy. So this is your reducer. This here is your activator or your hardener. And it's basically by 5-star as well. And then we've got the white primer sealer that we're going to be mixing up. Now what I paid for these 3 items here was just a little bit more. It was $83. Well, $81.73 is what I paid for these. You want to make sure you wear a respirator. Now this is what I use just for sanding, so it's kind of a smaller respirator. This one here is what I use for painting primers, and then I also have another one that I use for painting base clears. It's recommended to use a air supplied respirator, but I don't have one. So if anything, you have to make sure you use a respirator similar to this one, which you're going to be spraying epoxies, because it's a lot more intense for your lungs. You want to make sure that you have a decent respirator with some good filters. I'll be changing out the filters before I spray this. So let's take you over to the panel and I'll show you how the prep work goes, and we'll get it ready for the sealer. Now I've got this tailgate ready. What I did is I just hit it with 220, and then I went over the 220 with 100 grit. So it's hard to really tell from a picture and a video, but it's a pretty smooth finish. Now I shouldn't be touching it with my hands. Grease and oils from your hands is a no-go. So from here on out I'm going to be wearing gloves, but you can kind of feel and hear how smooth that is. Come over here to the one I haven't blasted yet. See that? So, and it doesn't have any shiny to it, and this one does. So this is going to be the process, and I'm going to show you here on the hood what we have to actually do to get some of this abrasive off here, because it's still quite dusty from the walnut blasting that they did. Now what they did is they blasted all of the jambs with a bead blast like glass, and then on the top panels they did all that with walnut to kind of help prevent any warpage or things like that. And they did the doors, they did the two fenders, they did the whole core support and the chrome bumper. Now, the chrome bumper will be a little bit different process, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. But let's take you over here to the hood and show you what the process is going to be. And what all I'm using is a Ryobi electric 5-inch sander, and then I got some 220 from Home Depot, and then I got some 100 grit from Home Depot, and these just basically Velcro onto the bottom of this sander, and that's all you really need. You don't need an air sander to do this process. Now what I'm going to do, and what I found worked best, is I'm going to kind of do it the backwards way. I'm going to hit it with 220 to get all of the whole edges and the flat area, and then once I hit it with 220, because I don't really want to get too aggressive on the metal and the edges and the corners, so I'm going to hit it all with 220, and then I'm going to come back with 100 grit on the paper. So right now I got 220, so I'm going to go ahead and just kind of sand through this, get it nice and smooth and nice and flat. And you notice I'm wearing my gloves now. Now that we're prepping it and getting it ready for primer sealer, it's important to make sure you're wearing gloves at this point, because from here on out, all the oils and the body stuff that you have will kind of bleed through and get into the raw metal, and it's very important to make sure you wear gloves. So here I go, I'm going to go and sand this through. Alright, now that I've got this all hit with 220, I'm going to go over it with 100, and I know that a lot of you out there are saying, hey, you're going backwards. No, I'm not necessarily going backwards, because I'm just doing a light coat of 100 grit, and that's so that the epoxy has something to bite to. Most primers would be just fine on 220, but because this is an epoxy primer and it's biting right to the metal, I want the metal to have a good hard edge on it so that that epoxy has something to stick to. So I've switched my 220 with 100 grit. I'm just going to kind of go over it real lightly. Alright, so that's all there really is to that. So I hit it with 220, come over it with 100 grit, and this is the area where we have not worked. I should have my gloves on, but I had to move this and reset it all up. But I haven't touched the panel. So but you can see there's this really nice hazy look to it, but still got a shine. It's a lot smoother finish than just going straight over blasting. Now, you could prime over blasting, but then that just gives you a lot of blocking at the end. An epoxy primer is not designed to be sanded. So that basically means if you hit straight sandblasting with epoxy primer, that means you have to go back over that again with a primer filler that you can actually sand and block. Because you can't sand and block epoxy primer. It's designed to just seal the surface. So what I'm trying to do is get it as smooth as possible, but still give the primer epoxy something to bite to. So it's got to have a little bit of sand scratches in it, and that's what I've done here. So I'm going to go ahead and go through the whole panel and get a couple panels ready, and then I'll come back in a few minutes and we'll show you guys how to apply the actual primer. So guys, I was noticing that the video is about 10 minutes long. What I'm going to do is end the video right here. I'm going to continue shooting and I'll continue building the video. But next week I'll show you guys how to apply the actual epoxy. I think I should probably separate that out into another video. You know, getting it ready, getting it prepped is kind of an in-depth procedure, and then we'll make sure when we apply the epoxy primer that it's kind of got its own video. So I'm going to end this video here, but just stay tuned to next week. I also wanted to show you something. When I stored this, I picked this up on Friday, today's Sunday, and I put a can of acetone on top of this, and I can actually see the outline right in the panel where the oil was from the can of acetone. So, and I can also see another little spot right here. So it's extremely important to make sure you get your epoxy primer on as fast as you can after you get this blasted, because it'll start to rust and it'll start to rot out and get surface rust on it, and oil will start to gather. If I was to take my hand and just sit it on this panel and just sit it there for like 10 seconds, and I come back in 2 or 3 days, you can actually see my fingerprints in the panel. So it's extremely important to keep this clean, keep your area sanded and smooth, and then get it primed as fast as possible. Now this has been out of the blaster. We picked it up on Friday, today's Sunday, so it's already been 2 days and this thing's still in raw metal. So today is going to be a really big day of just getting this stuff primed and ready. So I'm going to end this video here, and sorry for the long explanation, long outro. But I'm going to go and get all this stuff done, but I'm going to film it in the process so that you guys know how to actually apply the epoxy. And then we'll go see you guys next week. So please rate, subscribe, and follow this bagged and bodied Silverado. It's going to be a lot of, I think we've got about 25 videos on it so far. So everything step by step. So we'll see you guys next week.